they consider themselves cohabiting the Earth. Some are visitors, some are here resident, and they say they were here long before us and they'll be here a long time after us, which doesn't, it kind of concerns me. And that they harvest water, minerals, all sorts of things from the Earth. And they have been coming and going for many, many centuries.
Keep watching to learn more. You can now download all 8 copies of the New Thinking Aloud magazine for free, or order beautiful printed copies. Go to newthinkingaloud.org. New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at cihs.edu.
Book 4 in the New Thinking Aloud dialogue series is Charles T. Tart, 70 Years of Exploring Consciousness and Parapsychology, now available on Amazon.
Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today, we'll be exploring potential telepathic communication with alien entities. My guest is Dr. Angela Thompson Smith, an old friend I've known for decades, a remote viewer who was initially trained many years ago by both Paul Smith and Lynn Buchanan. She is a founding member and a director of the International Remote Viewing Association. She received her doctoral degree in psychology from Saybrook University in California, although she's originally from England. She's written several books, including Diary of an Abduction, a scientist probes the enigma of her alien contact, and we'll be doing a future interview on that book. Today we'll focus on her book called Voices from the Cosmos. Her other books include Seer, 30 Years of Remote Viewing, Tactical Remote Viewing, and Remote Perceptions, a book that includes out-of-body experiences, remote viewings, and other natural abilities. This is an internet interview, and now I'll switch over to the internet video. Welcome, Angela. It's a pleasure to see you.
Well, I'm happy to be here and happy to be part of your show.
We have known each other for a very long time. I remember you participated in a remote viewing study that I did well over 20 years ago.
I did back in when I was living in Las Vegas, and I think I did 3 or 4 or more sessions for you. I didn't feel they were too successful, but it was a good practice.
That particular study will be the topic, perhaps, of another video. But it does point out one thing which is useful for our discussion today, and that is that lots of times remote viewing experiments produce results that are close to chance.
Right, yeah.
And what we're going to be talking about today is a whole series of, it's hard to know whether I would call it telepathy or remote viewing, sort of maybe a combination of both, studies that you did for a private client who wanted you to begin to explore extraterrestrial races.
Right, and in particular, ET communication. And that was a fascinating project.
You worked on that for, I think, about a year. You have collected data on, I counted because I have a spreadsheet which we will make available to our viewers. And in fact, if you go to the upper right-hand corner of your screen, if you're viewing this right now, there'll be a link a hot link you can click on and download a spreadsheet from Angela's research that includes the characteristics of some 32 different alien races, presumably. So let's talk about how the project began.
Sure. I had a 9-year business client, and from about 2003 to 2012, and I did a variety of work for him. And some of them were straight business, remote viewing. Others were more his personal interests. And this was one of his personal interests. And he would call me up very often and say, I've got a project on ABC. Can you do this with remote viewing? So he surprised me one day and he said, can you talk to the ETs with remote viewing, or talk to the aliens with remote viewing? And he knew from a previous book that I did a little bit of earlier forays into that field with some interesting results that's documented in Remote Perceptions. And so we talked about it, and I put together a protocol based on his questions that he wanted to ask, plus indigenous interviews that would have been taken out perhaps into the Amazon and asked of people who had just a limited contact with us. So he wanted 5 different races interviewed to begin with, starting with the tall grey. And so what I did was I typed all of those questions into my computer, into a database. And then I sat there at the computer, fully awake. I wasn't in a trance state. I wanted to do this as objectively and as wide awake as possible. And I knew that there would be a lot of criticisms and skepticism, and I was skeptical myself because I didn't know what I was going to get. So I sat down and I said, okay, question number 1, is there a tall grey out there that would like to talk to me? And waited. And I started getting stuff back. And I asked the second question and the third question, and I got more information back. And I was on a roller coaster then. Once you start, you just have to keep going. Just went through to the end of the interview. And I must say that some of the questions, some of the responses, I didn't quite understand. So I'd have to ask clarifying questions. And not all of the answers resonated with my own beliefs and thoughts, which I was trying to very much keep out of the picture. For instance, they would say, the grey would say that abductions were beneficial to humans, and also that humans were very limited. And I had to sort of keep my own feelings in check, and sometimes ask, as I said, clarifying questions. And sent all that, packaged it all up, sent it off to the client, who said, wow, go on, do the next one. So we did that for a year. Only, I think it was 19 or 20 of the interviews made it into the book, Voices from the Cosmos. But as you say, there were many, many more. Some of them were only just mentioned in the interviews. Others we interviewed on a very limited basis. And there were more that we were going to interview, but we stopped at the end of the year.
So well, the very fact that you worked with this client for 9 years and he's paying you for your time would suggest that he was pleased with the results he was getting.
He was. I have a lot of correspondence from him, basically saying it was very, very helpful and very beneficial for his work, which was in finance. And I asked him one time, well, if you were to put a percentage on the help that I give you, what would it be? And he said, well, just remember that I work in the billions of dollars. And so he said, remote viewing adds about 2%. Now, that seems very small, but when you consider the amount of finance that he dealt with, that's pretty good.
Well, yes, 2% of 1 billion. We're running into many millions of dollars already. Off the top of my head, I'd say that's about 20 million. Right there.
I never received that.
Now, where did you get the notion to begin with that there was such a thing as tall grays?
I've done reading in the past, and always with an open mind. I'd also had some experiences myself over my lifetime, not calling them tall grays or short grays or etc. or reptilians. But I did write that up as another book.
So yes, your book, A Diary of an Abduction, I understand you're planning to republish.
Yes, I'm thinking in the summer, my next book, I'm currently working on a sequel to Seer, which is Scribe, and that's just gone up on Amazon Kindle, which I'm very happy about. As soon as I get the paperback up, then I'm going to start work on another book that I'm going to be calling Ultra Terrestrial. And that's the working title at the moment. And it's going to be based on Diary of an Abduction, which is, I have the copyright for. It's way out of date. And I'm going to sort of cannibalize it and also put in other work that's been done since. I've done quite a bit of ET off-planet work. And I'd like to put out a course. I'm very interested in Earth-based ETs who are here hiding in plain sight.
In your book, Diary of an Abduction, you report that a history of having had, one would have to call them intimate encounters with alien beings of some sort or another that probably helped to prepare you for the Voices of the Cosmos project.
I think so, because in writing Diary of an Abduction, it was very cathartic. And so I lost any fear of an encounter or contact. So I came into the work for Voices from the Cosmos with very strong, with no fear.
Maybe one of the reasons that in this ostensible telepathic conversation with a tall gray, he said abductions are positive, even though you seem to consciously resist that notion.
Well, me and many, many others, because it's different than what we would think of as a positive encounter. But Stephen Greer had said one time in an interview, I believe he was an emergency room MD at one time. He said, if a child is brought into, you may know this story, if a child is brought into the ET, that child is terrified because it doesn't know what to expect, particularly if it hasn't been in the hospital before. And the doctor sometimes has to do some procedures on the child. And the child does not look at that encounter as positive. But for the child, it's very positive because it could save their life.
That's the analogy, yeah. And you do have ostensible contactees, such as my friend Whitley Strieber, the author of Communion, who maintains that in spite of the fact that he felt he was literally raped, that at the end of the day, he regards it as a positive experience.
Right. Yes, I have read some of his work. And I was interested to hear of his experiences that were like mine, but also very different in some aspects. And mine were from childhood. I can remember a memory from my childhood where I must have been quite small, sitting in my living room with blocks. And my grandmother used to make me these felt blocks with alphabet blocks before I was ready for wooden ones. And I thought this tall, glowing, golden mother had come with her child to play with me. But they were not human. And they stood. They didn't sit down with me or crouch down. They talk to me, but I don't have any recollection of what we talked about, just about the visit.
We will do a future interview and talk about this very interesting history that you've had. You began to explore in quite a bit of depth. But going back to your telepathic encounter with the large gray, the tall gray, that was your very first one in the project that you did with your client.
I was looking back through the database again just to refresh my mind. And the fact that they don't consider us as advanced as them, they don't consider us, they consider us sentient human, but definitely we haven't reached our potential yet.
I think many humans would agree as well that we have a long way to go in terms of reaching our own potential. I certainly don't think that as a species, the human race is anywhere near its potential. I mean, for one thing, we're making a mess of the planet.
Right, I agree. And go on that line, one of the things I discovered was that they considered themselves cohabiting the earth. Some are visitors, some are here resident, and they say they were here long before us and they'll be here a long time after us, which doesn't, it kind of concerns me. And that they harvest water, minerals, all sorts of things from the earth. And they have been coming and going for many, many centuries.
Do they come from some sort of off-planet location?
Each of the races, I tried to explore that a little bit. Some just, their answer was, well, you wouldn't know where it was anyway, because we'll tell you our word, our name, and you wouldn't be able to know. And others said, oh, yes, we're just from across the universe. And so they really didn't use any of the names that we use. I tried to put in a few and said, are you from here? Are you from there? And the answers were always very vague. And I think that they're not only extraterrestrial, but they're interdimensional.
I notice in some instances on the spreadsheet that we're making available to our viewers, you actually had specific locations on a NASA map describing their place of origin.
Right. That was a little bit of exploration to try and pin them down. And I think that was one of the client's suggestions. But it was difficult, to ascertain exactly where they were from.
Well, you mentioned earlier that more than one of these alien races is living among us. In other words, they manage to present themselves to us in human form.
When I did the interviews, I had very little knowledge of Earth-based ETs. I don't like to use the word aliens because they cohabit with us. I accepted that there were people, ET groups that visited, came and went, and called them the visitors, and others that were here. And it wasn't until a few years ago when I was reading Charles Hall's books, Millennial Hospitality, particularly book 2, that blew me away. I went, I've met these folks. They've been here a long time, back in the 60s when he was encountering them up at, it's now Creech Air Force Base. They were just being introduced to society by the military. But I've met them in everyday life. And up till a few years ago, I honestly didn't know. I thought they were just very unusual people. And but now what I would like to do with ultra-terrestrial is perhaps interview a few. That I'm sure a lot of people are going to come out the woodwork and say, oh yeah, I'm an ultra-terrestrial. But I'm going to question them very, very closely and ask for some proofs before I accept anybody's story.
There are many people who will tell you that they have past life memories of having lived on other planets.
I've heard that too. Yeah. And who's to say that the soul is not interdimensional, interplanetary? We don't know.
We certainly don't know, and all I can report is that this is the subjective impression that people have. And anybody can just look on Facebook and you'll see all sorts of Facebook discussion groups having to do with the Pleiadians and the Arcturians and the Lyrians and various extraterrestrial locations and what their culture is about and what they're doing. Now, I have no way of judging whether this is all fantasy or reality, and surely that same question must have dawned on you with regard to your own work.
Oh, absolutely. When I started doing the work, I realized this was going to create a great deal of skepticism of people coming in and saying, well, it's probably just your own imagination. You're probably picking up somebody telepathically, somebody in their basement in San Francisco, sending out messages and hoping somebody picks them up, because I am sort of receptive. And the client, too, was skeptical at certain points and said, well, could you talk to this group again and ask some clarifying questions? But I knew that there would be skepticism. And eventually, if I can jump ahead a little bit, when the project ended and my client had sold his business and relocated and our contract ended, he had said that I could publish the ET interviews. So they'd been sitting in my computer for about 7 years. So I thought, well, let me write them up. Let me find somebody that would maybe look at them. And I'm not sure if you're aware of Donald Ware. He offered to post one interview or one segment of it a week to his 600-person email list. And so I went under a pseudonym. I think I used Rosetta Stone, just as good as anything. So the comments started coming back. Wow, this is amazing work. This has to be published. This is important stuff. So I think there were only 1 or 2 negative comments. So I was very encouraged by that. And my co-author came through that route, Z.B. Scott Jones. I'd known Scott for many decades, but because I did this under a pseudonym, he didn't know who was putting out these ET interviews, and so he wrote, "Who is this guy that's putting these up on the site? I'd like to talk to him." So I responded saying, "Hi, Scott, it's me, Angela." So he was very surprised.
Well, let's talk about him a little bit. He's the co-author with you of the book, Voices of the Cosmos, and he writes extensively about work he did in conjunction with Lawrence Rockefeller, who had a great interest in extraterrestrials and their potential contact with the U.S. government. He sponsored conferences. He sponsored many private meetings with scientists and government officials. And Scott Jones was involved closely in all of that.
He was. Scott had a distinguished history. He was an Air Force pilot. He was a diplomat. He worked for Senator Pell as an aide. And Pell used to send him off to all of the conferences, both the parapsychological, ET, alternative health, alternative energy. So Scott has written quite a few chapters in Voices from the Cosmos, outlining a lot of work that he did that has never been published before. This was new stuff that he'd just been waiting for a venue. So in Voices from the Cosmos, you will get firsthand information of the early years, the early days, and behind the scenes information about the field.
Now, you're referring to Senator Claiborne Pell, as I recall, of Rhode Island, who I've met. He was a board member of the Institute of Noetic Sciences back in the day when I had an affiliation there.
Well, I didn't know that. Yeah, I knew him from the Society for Scientific Exploration and also from PAIR.
You're talking about the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Program, with which you were also affiliated.
I worked there for 5 years. Yeah. I had been volunteering at another parapsychology lab, and that was closing down. They recommended that I go over to Princeton. And I went over as a volunteer for a few months, I'm sorry. And then they said, "Would you like to work here?" I was like, "Absolutely, yes." So they hired me on, and I stayed there for 5 years, which was a fascinating 5 years.
Well, the point I'm bringing this up because the idea that you might be engaging in telepathic communication, putting up a detailed, almost like a zoological typology of extraterrestrial races. It's such a controversial idea. I think it's important to establish your own background, your credentials in this field, and the people with whom you worked. This is not just a fantasy project. This was done with serious intent.
Absolutely. And I've had people come up to me and saying, if you and Scott were not PhDs with the backgrounds that you have, I would have totally dismissed this work. So that's been a common thread going through the criticisms.
One of the big criticisms that I would be aware of is that normally in remote viewing, we want to get feedback from the target so that we can compare the information produced by a percipient with the actual target. Are there any instances in which you were able to have some sort of validation or correlation with the information you were receiving?
Occasionally, from other literature. And of course, it's very difficult to get correlation from the ETs themselves, unless it was face to face. The Charles Hall books really provided me with a great deal of feedback, and particularly on the Nordics. And I'm still open to feedback. Sometimes you have to wait for years. Back in the 1994, this is a little aside, I did a project on the rings of Saturn. And that was through some folks you knew that were an offshoot of Ed Dame's SciTech. And at the time, it seemed very, very incongruous, what I was perceiving. But I wrote it up. I had to wait until the Cassini probe went to the rings of Saturn before I got my feedback. So that was 11 years and then another few years on that. So it was a total of 20 years before I got total feedback on that project. So there's feedback out there sometime, somewhere.
I presume what you're saying is that your description of Saturn turned out to be accurate.
The rings of Saturn, yeah. A lot of very interesting features of the rings and the formation of the rings was validated by NASA looking at the Cassini footage.
And I know, of course, Ingo Swann is famous for having done remote viewing probes of Jupiter, as I recall, before the space probes were able to validate his information.
Absolutely. Nobody knew about the rings of Jupiter at that time. And of course, in his book, Penetrations, he talks about how he was hired by an enigmatic Mr. Axelrod to go and look at the moon. And so that's a very interesting write-up.
Mm-hmm. I think it's also worth mentioning, if I recall correctly, Ingo Swann wrote a foreword to your book, Remote Perceptions.
He did. The very first book I wrote to him and said, I've got this book and I would very much like you to write the foreword. And he said, well, and he wrote back saying, well, you're going to have to come out to New York and have dinner with me first. So, which I did. I had moved out of Princeton at that time. I was in Las Vegas, the early days of Las Vegas. And so I traveled over to New York and had dinner with Ingo, gave him a copy of the manuscript, and he did indeed write the foreword to Remote Perceptions.
To the extent that you're steeping yourself in the literature of extraterrestrial encounters. And actually, to my knowledge, it's a vast literature at this point because there's so many channelers, there's so many people who claim to have direct face-to-face encounters with aliens. One could probably fill your entire bookshelf with accounts from various people of their human-alien communications. So what I'm wondering is, to what extent did that sort of create a cloud over the work that you did, that you already were aware of this literature?
I wasn't aware of all of it. I had been to a couple of MUFON conferences, and I had read some of the literature, and of course SSE. But I really wasn't steeped in the field. My field was more, because I came from a medical research background. And up until I started work at PAIR, I was still in that medical research field. So I was new to the field. So I really haven't had, and some of the work I deliberately haven't immersed myself in.
You mentioned earlier one of the alien species, or ET species, you contacted. You referred to them as the Nordics, and I think we're talking about tall humanoid individuals with typically long blonde hair or white hair, I think, and to my recollection, I first read about Nordic visitors back in the 1950s, I think, in the writings of George Adamski. So if one looks at the spreadsheet, which we're making available, you've got, as I mentioned, 32 species. Each one has a name. Where did those names come from?
Those names were pre-assigned because the client, first of all, said the first 5 that he wanted to interview. And then at the end of each interview, we asked the group that we were interviewing, the representative of a group, who else can we talk to? And they recommended another group to interview. So very much, there were groups I had no knowledge of. It was very interesting to go in and interview them as a totally new group.
Some of these groups seem very unfriendly to humans. Others seem very friendly and helpful.
That was one of the things that convinced me that I was getting real stuff, because each of the groups had a totally different personality. Some were a group personality, some were individual. And one of the groups, as I wrote about, the reptilians, the hooded reptilians, did not want to talk to me. But I'm a very persistent, stubborn kind of person. And I persisted and I said, no, I really do need to talk to you. And they were begrudgingly giving me answers. And some of the answers were, I put NA, no answer, or no response, NR. And I decided I would ask them a few of my own questions, which was, if you meet a human on board a craft, because they travel with the Greys, they said, how would you react to that? And they said, well, we would make a loud noise at them, and that would make them move, which I think would probably make me move. And so my next question was, well, if they didn't move when you made a loud noise at them, and of course I was typing all this into the computer, what else would you do? And they came back and said we would push them, which also is kind of a chilling kind of answer. So it was very interesting to get all this knowledge.
Some of these, I'm going to call them visitors, but that's probably not the right word, because you imply that they have actually been on this planet for a long time, and they consider themselves as belonging to this planet as much as we do.
Some of them made that claim, and in fact, some of them, the Oranges, who are, they'd say they're cousins of the Greys, actually live underground. And there are stories of miners and cavers who've been down in the bowels of the earth, and miners that have heard strange metallic noises, machinery, voices, sounds coming from deep within the earth. And so there are races, there are others that live underneath the earth. And so the Oranges were a very interesting race. Now, we could consider them very much as co-inhabitors of the earth, not necessarily visitors.
I presume since they, as you say, live under the earth, they're not necessarily mingling with humans.
No, they do mingle with the Greys. They are sometimes on the Greys' craft. Mostly they are underground. They mine, they trade in rare earths, rare minerals.
And so they specialize in mining and metallurgy, I gather.
Right, yeah. Now, when you hear the talk about the gnomes in England, in our history, then that they mined metal and they were underground and they were short folks, and now perhaps they were an ET race. Who knows?
Well, Jacques Vallée, in his writings, points out that there seems to be quite a correlation between the fairy legends of different cultures and the reports of people in modern times regarding communication with alien or ET entities or other dimensional entities.
I'd read a little bit of that. And also, when you look at petroglyphs, having now living in the American Southwest, of course, I've been looking at different petroglyphs in different parts of the Southwest. And so many, the ant people occur time and time again in many different regions. So there are stories of the ET races talking about the star people that came to visit them. So there's a long history.
And you point out, if I recall correctly, in especially from reviewing the spreadsheet, that some of these ET races have really made a point of communicating with indigenous people.
I believe so. It's quite possible they also interacted with Western folks too, but there's very, very little literature. There are indigenous stories passed down from father to son to daughter to children of interactions with the star people. And some have actually written these up. My colleague, who's no longer here, Paula Underwood Spencer, had written up a wonderful story about the stories that she had got from her father, who was, I believe, Cherokee. I don't remember exactly. And about meeting up with the star people.
There are books. I have been in contact with a Native American who's actually been researching this. I think there's quite a lot of lore and shamanistic traditions that points in this direction. And it seems as if there's some overlap. You refer, for example, to some of these beings that don't really have physical bodies at all, unless on occasion they wish to project a body that somebody like a human could interact with.
Yeah, they range from, and this is what surprised me, I was expecting to interact with fairly substantial bodies of folks, although I didn't actually see them in my interviews. But they range from, some of them are just pure energy that can materialize as a body, to just purely physical that cannot shift out of the physical. So there was a whole range.
And so if we look at the literature of, for example, people who, in shamanistic traditions, they communicate with a range of beings. They're sometimes referred to as devas or deities or daemons or demons or elementals. I think elementals is included in your list.
There are. The only races that made it into Voices from the Cosmos were the ones that we could say had any extraterrestrial connection at all. But the clients, I had also done a lot more work for the client, looking at devas and jinns, and I mean, a whole series of ultra-terrestrials that were basically in the literature. Because the client was very interested in these entities. So those didn't make it into the book, but maybe will one day.
And I know Whitley Strieber in his writings makes a point of saying that in some of his encounters with what he calls the visitors, there also appeared individuals who were deceased. He may not have known they were deceased at the time, but he seems to think there's some sort of an overlap between the ET literature and the spiritualist literature.
That's possible. That hasn't been my own experience. The shamanic experiences and the ET experiences have been quite separate. But I have read too that, and it's possible because of the ET ability to travel interdimensionally, that perhaps they can facilitate that kind of encounter.
In your catalog on the spreadsheet, which I gather was put together by another person who went through your reports and created this taxonomy that is now on a spreadsheet that we're sharing with our viewers, you go into quite a bit of detail about the various talents of each of these races. So they have strengths and weaknesses, particularly in terms of their psychic abilities.
Absolutely. Yeah, this was put together by Dee Garcia, and I met her at a conference, and she presented the disc to me as a gift. And she said, I love your book. I've been through the book. I've been very careful. And she had been very thorough. And it must have taken her weeks to do this work. She said, this is my gift to you. Do what you want with it. So I was like, thank you. I was just so happy. And that's why I offer it for free. It was a gift to me, so it's a gift to other people.
And now we're giving it away to any of our viewers. I'll just say one other time, if you click on the upper right-hand corner of your screen, you could download that spreadsheet file right now if you're curious about it. So some of these beings live, many different races, it seems like, live amongst us, live as humans, that you might not be able to distinguish them. They might be working in an office building or a military complex with you, and you wouldn't know that they were necessarily extraterrestrial.
That's true, and I would imagine a lot of people have already encountered them and didn't even know, because many of them are very humanoid looking and acting. And unless you knew who they were, because they're basically hiding in plain sight. And I've tried to, get some information from them about the kinds of things they do here on Earth. And a lot of them do volunteer work. They work in government and local businesses. And I have encountered some of them. I think some of that will go into ultra-terrestrial, and they are everywhere. And another time, perhaps I'll tell you more about the local hotel that seems to be a meeting place.
Well, in fact, I do recall a previous conversation you and I had about that, and I've also we have a mutual friend, Ron and Sue, who were with you on one occasion when you experienced in one of the Las Vegas hotels such an encounter. Entered into a very unusual state of consciousness in the presence of this apparent ET individual, people and my friends, our mutual friends Ron and Sue, told me quite independently of any discussion with you about this years ago, and they referred to that event many times. It had a very, very strong impression on them.
It did on me too. It was a big impact. And we did try to replicate it, but it didn't quite work. I think that was a chance encounter that we explored briefly, and it did make a big impression on us.
I have no personal experience, telepathic or otherwise, of ET communication, but I talk to many people who are convinced of it. And I've also, of course, for all of our viewers probably know, I've written a book called The PK Man about an individual who claimed to have extraordinary communication of that type and produced on-demand UFO appearances.
I read it. I have. Yes.
So even though the kinds of things that you're describing, Angela, seem so bizarre that there are certainly going to be viewers of this series who will say they just can't accept it. It's too far out. My attitude is some of the things that you think are so strange that you can't possibly accept are some of the most important things to look at.
Absolutely. And I think that we will become more aware over the next decades of our visitors. And I like to think back to when my great-great-grandparents were alive, and they, if you tried to explain to them a cell phone or TV or some of what people are doing nowadays, the children are all glued to their phones, they would say, that's so bizarre. But it's come to be reality in our lifetime.
Well, we have, of course, a group of scientists who claim that they're searching for extraterrestrial life, and maybe there's some bacteria on one of the moons of Saturn that they'll encounter. They discount all of the UFO literature as being unworthy of their attention. They discount all of the 150-year history of research in parapsychology and psychical research. They discount the reports from anthropologists regarding the communications that shamans all over the world claim to experience. But if you don't discount all of that, then the possibility that we are part of a large interstellar community makes perfect sense.
Absolutely. And I think that's changing slightly. When I worked in medical research, the department I was in, the professor was a numerologist. His assistant was a tarot card reader. And each of the professors in the department all had some sort of interesting hobby, but they would never, ever have discussed that with their scientific colleagues. We knew because of being in the department. And of course, I was a remote viewer. But if you scratch a scientist, you will sometimes find some interesting abilities and interests.
Well, I tend to think that each person is actually deep inside a mystic.
Yes.
They're in a little bit of denial about it, but I think by virtue of being consciousness itself is mystical to me. And mysticism, for me, Angela, the bottom line of mysticism, and mystics all around the world will say this, is that we are one with everything. As my friend, the philosopher Bernardo Kastrup says, there is one eye that sees the world through every being.
Yeah.
So there's a sense in which, if we take that as axiomatic, which I tend to do, that we all share the very same ground of being, then we're one with each other. We're one with the plants and the animals, and also one with extraterrestrial and other dimensional beings.
I believe so, and we're supposedly made of stardust, right? So we are all the stars already.
And that's literally true, that the molecules and atoms in our body were produced by supernova explosions on distant star systems.
Yeah. So that's a good start.
Well, Dr. Angela Thompson-Smith, this has been a delightful conversation. I'm very pleased that you're willing to share these extraordinary experiences and findings in a very level-headed, sober manner. Thank you so much for being with me.
You're welcome, and thank you for having me here.
And I look forward to future conversations with you.
Excellent. Thank you.
And for those of you watching, thank you for being with us.
Book 4 in the new Thinking Aloud dialogue series is Charles T. Tart, 70 Years of Exploring Consciousness and Parapsychology, now available on Amazon.
New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at cihs.edu. You can now download all 8 copies of the New Thinking Aloud magazine for free, or order beautiful printed copies. Go to newthinkingaloud.org. For early access to our videos and live stream events, sign up for our free weekly newsletter at newthinkingaloud.org.